Three. Welcome back to another episode of these crazy people that just eat meat and can't stop talking about it. Today it's just me and Justin. Justin had a hot topic we want to talk about. So, with the rush of public violence that we hear about, we wanted to talk about how we think the world would be a better, less violent place if people ate more meat. That's right. We think that carnivory is the answer to violence. Why? It's because when you live on a meat-based diet, people tend to be calmer, more easygoing. We have definitely seen many hundreds of anecdotes about people's mental illness improving, people's anxiety going down, people's depression retreating. People feel better, people feel happier, people are more patient. And so we think, in a world where we're always concerned about violence, even though historically things are getting better than they've ever been, one of the reasons we might be able to uh, see that improve in the future is by people eating a better diet. So throw your 2 cents in there, Justin.
Yeah, so we are filming this on March 26th, 2021, and anyone that follows the United States news cycle will notice that there have unfortunately been a few mass shootings within the last week or so, and there's two sides to every story, and you have one side that seems to think that guns are a huge issue, and they have their arguments and their ideas of, well, if we just take the means away, then we will no longer have the crime. And then you kind of have the other side that kind of goes to more, well, it's not the means, it's not the weapon, it's a tool. There's millions of people that own weapons. I think it's said that there's two times the amount of weapons in the United States than there are citizens, or something like that. And so many people have arsenal of some kind, and obviously aren't out there doing unlawful activities with them. And so these two sides just seem to, I mean, since I can remember, ever since I was a kid, I remember Columbine shooting in 1994, I believe, is when that was a very, very big issue when I was growing up. And I remember that being all over the news. And, I watched what's his name, the movie Bowling for Columbine, when I was young, and all that stuff. So in American culture, it's kind of hard to escape one side or the other of the issue. And in this video, we're not trying to convince people one side or the other. You have your opinions, and your opinions are acceptable. Now, parts of it that I would like to focus on, though, is that there does seem to be a lot of link between psychiatric medication and these mass shooters, or mass streaks of violence. Most murders are also alcohol fueled. A lot of people, if they're going to off themselves or go, murder an ex or something horrible like that, oftentimes they do it in an inebriated state with alcohol and drugs, whether those drugs be legal or illegal. And so my thinking is that, as Tom stated earlier, that it seems, now again, we can't recommend a person, your health is between you and your doctor, but it does seem that there's several stories in the carnivore community of people coming off of psychiatric medication when they go carnivore, because their depression is better, their anxiety is better. Sometimes it's as extreme symptoms as bipolar, schizophrenia, maybe even some extreme personality disorders may even be affected, although there's no research in that area yet. But there does seem to be that people don't seem to need these psychiatric medications once they're carnivore for a good amount of time. And the thing is that these psychiatric medications have side effects A very famous case recently is, well, Jordan Peterson. He was taking, under the supervision of a psychiatrist, taking those benzodiazepines, and ended up having, I forget the exact name of it, but basically, it's like an allergic reaction where you end up with the opposite of.
Yeah.
Well, that's what he ended up with, but there's a word for when you take a medication and instead of getting the desired result, you actually get the opposite. And that's actually what happened to Jordan Peterson, is that he actually had an adverse reaction to it, but it was beyond that because it was a reverse reaction. Instead of calming him down, it amped him up, and then that's how he ended up with the akathisia. And that happens to people. And the psychiatric community, we really do not have these psychiatric drugs down to a total science. The way they work is that they actually trigger many different systems in the brain, or they try to target certain areas, or dopamine receptors or serotonin receptors or oxytocin receptors, etc. But we're not good yet, and maybe we'll get there, at specifically targeting a particular spot, cell or set of cells within the brain. It kind of hits kind of everywhere, and it's a bit of a crapshoot, honestly. And this isn't my opinion. This is, you read through the psychiatric texts, and you actually talk to PhD level or listen to interviews, and they will tell you that that's how it works, and then so it's going in there and it's hitting many different switches. And for some people, that switch could be something that, makes them more volatile and possibly more violent, or psychotic, or, on many psychiatric medications for depression, on the bottles, there is a warning to not give to children, or to not give people, under 17 or 16, because in the studies, it tended to make younger people suicidal, and so we do know that there is somewhat of a link of inhibited violent behavior, whether towards self or to others, with the use of psychiatric medication. And so it's like, well, if people can heal these psychiatric conditions without the medication, my thinking is that there would also be a decrease in these mass shootings or large, events where violence happens, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I can't help but suspect that the wrong diet makes people's psychiatric conditions worse. And if anybody's seen that video with Dr. Chris Palmer, he talks about how he tried helping patients just get on the Atkins diet to lose weight, and then noticed that their psychiatric symptoms got better and they needed less medication. And oftentimes it's the medication that really shortens the people's lives, and especially like with schizophrenics. So it's not that eating meat necessarily cured their condition, but it certainly alleviated the symptoms to and improved their quality of life. So I mean, I remember. Do you remember Buford Furrows in 1999? He shot the mailman on the way to I think it was a Jewish school for kids, Granada Hills. He was a psychiatric patient. He had warned people that he was going to hurt people. He'd stabbed a nurse with a pencil and said that he needed to be locked up. And not only did they not lock him up, they didn't take his guns away, which is the law. It's like when somebody's violent like that, somebody's supposed to let the cops know, go, this guy's threatening to kill people. So if he has firearms, you need to go take him away, which makes sense, right? And then nobody did it, so he did quite a bit of damage. And we could talk about gun control and all that, but that doesn't really stop the violence. And even here in California, we had a California senator, I think his name was Leland Yee, and he was typical California, progressive liberal, was anti-gun, and then he got busted by the FBI and pleaded guilty to felony racketeering and charges that included money laundering, public corruption, and gun trafficking. And in that case, those guns were coming from China. A lot of times you see, people, you see these movies of people, the AK-47 is a very popular rifle. Most of those rifles come either from Soviet bloc countries or China, so it's not necessarily a US problem. I know everybody's like, oh, US makes all the guns and the weapons and stuff like that. And that's part of it is cultural, right? I mean, let's face it, in Switzerland, all the men are compelled to join the military, and when you get out of the military, you go home with an assault rifle, and you have it the rest of your life, and that's built into Switzerland's insurance program of security. But they rarely have shootings. They almost never have shootings. And like one of our friends said that, if we had Black Friday here, nobody'd be rioting over a TV, right? So it's a vast cultural difference that's really important. So, and I think just like, not to be too controversial, but with the epidemic that came down, we heard a lot about wearing masks and social distancing and waiting for a vaccine. And we heard very little about your immune system and how to strengthen your immune system. And everybody knows that a healthy immune system is worth all the vaccines in the world, right? So it's a much better defense than waiting for a shot, right? Or being clustered in your house, not being able to go outside, or whatever, or losing your job, losing your business, or eventually losing your house because you lost your job or your business, which is stressful. Suicides have been very high, domestic violence has been very high, and people have been ODing and drinking themselves into a stupor like crazy because of the lockdown. So you can't just lock people down without consequences that you have to balance about. And meanwhile, very, very little was said about how we need to work on our immune system. So, and I think what, considering how vast the psychiatric problems are, we hear about the vast numbers of people that suffer from depression, the vast number of people that are on SSRIs or taking benzodiazepines, which are very dangerous. um, we people ought to be talking about diet, and people ought to consider that their diet may have something to do with making their depression or anxiety or even schizophrenia worse, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the inflammation in the brain and the metabolics. They go on these psychiatric drugs and they get fat, and a lot of people stop taking their psychiatric drugs because they gain weight. Because they blow up. So there is a metabolic connection there. You
Yeah,
know.
I'm not mistaken. You mentioned Columbine. If I'm not mistaken, the boys involved there were on psychiatric medication. Colorado shooter that busted into the movie theater, he was obviously on psychiatric medication. Buford Furrow's psychiatric medication. The guy that shot up the church, the first was the first Annie church in I forgot which town it was in. The guy that went in and shot the people in the Bible study, he was on psychiatric medication. These people are mentally unstable to begin with, and like you said, drugs in a certain amount of cases are going to have the opposite effect of what we want them to have. So, a handful of people are going to get worse when you put them on psychiatric medications, right?
Yeah, and we just don't see people get worse psychiatrically on a keto carnivore, high protein, high fat diet. At least I haven't seen it. Maybe it does happen, but I personally haven't seen it. You know, and so it, I think in the psychiatric community, which I am a part of, we want the best solutions, right? Because we want a more peaceful world. We obviously, no matter where you are in the political um, spectrum, you you don't want to see these horrible things happen. I mourn for the families, I mourn for the victims, and I mourn for the perpetrator because the perpetrators often themselves were a victim of, you know, trauma, childhood, bad diet, um, distorted thinking, psychiatric symptoms, maybe paranoid, thinking. Who knows? Could be a myriad of things. And so the perpetrators are also victims, and we are doing them a disservice by, just signing off prescriptions for pills. I'm sorry, but the doctor, that's prescribing those pills, they don't get in trouble. Even then the drag, when these shootings happen, you don't see people going after prescription manufacturers or drug manufacturers or the doctors or the psychiatrists or the psychologists that this person was working with. And it's like, so and I get it. And I'm not saying that things should change, that it should, but I kind of feel like if you're going to go after gun manufacturers, it's only fair to also go after, the prescription drug manufacturers if they were using these prescription drugs that were prescribed to them, and especially if they were taking them as prescribed, which I know oftentimes doesn't happen. But I mean, if one side is culpable for making a product, then how come the other side is also not comparable for pumping out a product? That's just my thinking, and I might be wrong, but that just makes logical sense to me.
Right. Yeah, no, there's a lot of blame to go around. I mean, and banning things isn't necessarily the answer. It's giving people the information to make better choices and put it in their hands. If you think that all your answers are going to come from a doctor who's practicing medicine, just ask how many doctors have patients with serious psychiatric problems that they really feel like are making a lot of progress, right? And a lot of them will tell you, we're really just trying to help them maintain, you know. So if, changing your diet might help, give it a try. A better quality of life is a better quality of life. And I know, particularly with the people I work with in the autistic community, you see people frequently who have been racked with anxiety their whole lives, digestive issues their whole lives, a very low quality of life, gain a lot of that back. The digestive issues go away, the anxiety comes down, the depression improves, their overall health and vitality is better, they're more active, but because they want to be active, they feel better, right? So I think, it's been known since the 60s that people with psychiatric problems tend to have higher levels of acetate in the brain. And it seems as though what happens on a high carb diet is that certain parts of the brain that require glucose become insulin resistant, and then the glucose can't get into the cells in that part of the brain, and then the brain doesn't work as well. And that is, seems to be a pretty clear path for what's probably a worsening of psychiatric conditions. Then
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay, Tom. Oh, and you have your amino acids, the fats that are really good for the brain. You know, there was, I don't know if they ever did it, but they were thinking about putting prisoners on a plant-based diet to try and calm them down. And I don't remember what happened to those experiments, but I think with what we know, we think prisoners might do better and they might have less instances of violence or what have you in prison if they were actually on a more meat-based or fat and high protein keto carnivore diet. you know because people on a vegan or a vegetarian diet seem to become more unstable and not more stable. Some things may improve, losing weight, etc., but as far as mental health for a lot of people, it seems to make that worse. Or they may mask it with virtue of them believing that they're a better person now. But
Well, if you cut a lot of crappy stuff out of your diet and eat a plant-based diet, most people probably tend to feel better, at least in the beginning. Because you are eliminating things that could potentially make you feel worse. But as we've seen, it seems as though after a year or two, as people's some nutrients become depleted in the body, then people tend to do worse at that point, right? That's why so many vegans quit. It's like 85% quit in the first 2.5 years or something like that, and most of them cite catastrophic health problems. So I'm surprised it's not more widely known, but we come across that statistic quite a bit. And of course, you know I don't want to repeat it too often, but a lot of the people in the carnivore community are ex-vegans or ex-plant-based people who tried it, and they're usually very successful on the carnivore diet because one, they feel amazing, and two, they're already disciplined enough to change their diet. They're not afraid to try and change their diet, and they're usually able to adapt rather quickly. So they tend to be outspoken advocates of the carnivore diet for that reason.
Yeah, totally. I mean, just the benefits, and it just becomes obvious at that point. Hey, you've already tried one side, might as well try the other, right? And there is a saying in the carnivore community, the zero carb zen. We're in many carnivore groups, and some of them are Zoom based, some of them are Facebook, some of them are on Instagram, some of them are here, some of them are there. Um, yeah, there is the occasional disagreement. Yeah, we're not, carnivores are not groupthink. We all have outside identities and outside ideologies and attachments, to things. But I don't see a lot of like name calling. Most people seem to be respectful overall. I don't see, this crazed, violent, meat eating, conquering kind of caveman or cave woman. Doesn't seem to really happen. People seem to be able to hear counterpoints and be okay with that without, kind of flying off the handle or having this overly emotional reaction, or just becoming frustrated or having to force their point on other people. It seems to be a very live and let live kind of community. And maybe it's just us, maybe it's just the people I know in there. Uh, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of like spitefulness or name calling or just pettiness, at least that I can see. Now, and this is coming from two people that have gotten either a strike or a straight up ban from even a carnivore group. And, you know, um, neither of us are there creating like a fake account to, harass the rest of the group members or anything like that. We just kind of let it roll off our back and kind of just keep moving forward, keep doing our own thing.
Yeah, some of those groups have their own culture. Like I think it's zeroing in on health. Their policy is like they're just about eating meat and keeping it as simple as possible, and they don't want people talking about fasting or other things, eating other things or whatever. They have their method, and I respect it because it is they boiled it down to the thing that they found that helped the most people uh get through, understand it and get through it right in the beginning. And they don't want to complicate it with other stuff, and I get that because there's always this temptation. It's like, well, this worked, what if I did this as well? And a lot of times when people start doing too many things in the beginning, they wind up sabotaging themselves, and they never really get through the initiation. So I get it. Some of those groups are kind of strict, or some will say, hey, don't talk about cheat days. But like you and I, we've never been about cheat days, but we hear people that plan on it, right? And they bring that in. We all bring baggage in from other diets. So I'm sure if you come from another diet and it's like, well, you got to eat variety. And it's like, well, the truth is I've probably eaten over 1,000 steaks in a row, and I still look forward to the next one. Not a lot of variety, although I do eat some oysters and some shrimp. Occasionally I have some pork. I'm not opposed to eating chicken or turkey here and there, but day in and day out, I just eat steak and I love it. I feel great. It's easy. So, and I'm not opposed to like, hey, you want to have some bologna or a hot dog or, a hamburger or whatever. That's all good. As far as I'm concerned, that's way better. But some people, that's not strict enough. We know some people that only eat ribeye and drink water, right? And we know plenty of people that only eat raw. I get good ribeye. I have eaten only raw ribeye for, well, been eating raw ribeye every day for probably like a week straight. And in there I've had a hot dog or something like that, when I was in a hurry or whatever. But um I don't think everybody needs to eat raw meat. And I don't think everybody needs to eat ribeye all the time or whatever. And I know some people, they're not eating any shrimp or oysters or anything. They're keeping it simple, and that's fine. And I think that's one of the things is that I look at it like, what have human beings been doing for the last 400,000 years, and what did our ancestors do before that? The pre-humans, I look at it like, well, they mostly ate big animals, but they clearly ate shellfish and whatever else they could get their hands on, birds, bird eggs, fish or whatever. That clearly didn't make up most of the diet. And we clearly have a need for fat, for animal fat. And that in itself might be a major clue to what's going on with people and their psychiatric conditions get worse. They may not have enough animal fat. They may be having too much plant fat in their brains, in addition to too much glucose, too much insulin, insulin resistance, inflammation, and so on and so forth, right? So we don't really know, but we clearly evolved eating animals, right? There was no broccoli, there was no bananas. The bananas, prehistoric bananas are these tiny little things that were full of seeds. They weren't near as sweet. Same thing with tomatoes, potatoes. All wild potatoes are toxic. The modern potatoes that we eat, they're much less toxic. Uh, are a modern adaptation that we did not evolve to eat. Same thing with corn, wheat, rye, millet, whatever. It doesn't matter what's a grain, a vegetable, a fruit. Almost everything has been curated and hybridized in order to make it less toxic, more tasty. A lot of the fruits that we eat now, nobody ate them because they tasted terrible, right? They tasted terrible. They were bitter. They were full of seeds, and eating meat was far more satisfying. And people don't realize that. They think that there was all these plants laying around for us to eat. We were just digging up tubers and eating nuts and munching on greens, and it just wasn't the case, right? For at least for the last 3 million years, probably closer to 4, because we know there's hard archaeological evidence that pre-humans were butchering animals 3.7 million years ago. And of course, our ancestors left these cave paintings all over the world. There's nothing in there really about eating plants. It's always about, oh my God, look at these big fatty animals. They taste so good. This sustains us, these great big beautiful creatures. And that's how nature is. We really are, if we want to be part of nature, we can't really fight our biology, right? We could be kind to animals, we could dispatch them humanely, but a domesticated animal has a much better life than a wild animal. That's just the case, right? And when you put them down humanely, and you butcher them, and you put them to good use, you're just continuing on the natural process in a kinder way, right? And that's what being human is really about.
Definitely. Very well said, Tom.
Well, thank you.
I think my wrap up is, when it comes to solving these big societal issues, whether it's the violence, the psychiatric issues, the myriad of things we have going on that are in any daily news cycle, we have to make sure that we're looking in the right direction of the problem and we're asking the right questions. If our focus is on the wrong thing, then our solution is going to be wrong, and then we're just going to be back to square one, or possibly even worse off than where we were before. So that's why I think it's important to talk about these things, because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe if these, for psychiatric conditions, maybe these violent individuals putting on the carnivore diet, maybe they would get worse. But I just feel like that's an easier thing to do societally than these big sweeping legislations, one way or the other, that our elected leaders and other people seem to jump to, you know, um, because that seems to have been tried in many different places, and many different places still seem to struggle with um, large, violent events uh, in their society. Unfortunately, and again, I think any genuine person wants a more peaceful world, and this just seems to be an easier way to get there, a more personal way to get there. Um, and uh, if it was tax dollars for steak for the mentally ill, I mean, I feel like that's something that could be sold to the American population all across the spectrum. When if they're willing to listen, maybe not the vegans, maybe the vegans would vote no, but I think the majority of people, if you just talk to them, I know people generally aren't rational, but, I think as this grows, as the carnivore community grows, as it continues to do, and as the stories of psychiatric as well as physical illness diminishes while people are on a keto and carnivore diet, and the stories get more and more out, I think people are going to start asking these questions. Why aren't we giving more meat and fat to our most vulnerable populations? It's really, really sad. We're blessed, or we are privileged, although I hate the term, that we A, know about the diet, and B, have access to the meat to sustain it. That's amazing. I don't know how to get meat and fat enough to the mentally ill and or the homeless. You go down to Skid Row or just downtown LA any day of the week, and those people aren't homeless. It's not purely just because of drugs, or they're bad people, or they're immoral, or they have sin, or whatever. Many of them are mentally ill, and they just genuinely don't know how to take care of themselves, or how to run a household, how to budget. Our typical modern world is very, very complicated,
Mm.
and it takes a lot of brain power, a lot of relaxation, a lot of knowing how to handle the stressors. Yes, we are not facing down, bears in forests, but we're facing down, thousands of tiny bears each day with stress at work, stress in family, relational stress, um,
Traffic.
societal stress, traffic, right? Exactly. And I love the phrase from The Killing Joke, which is a Batman comic, and they recently made an animated movie. But what's the difference between Batman and the Joker? Just one really bad day. And there's a lot of people out there that get up every morning, and they're just one flat tire, one overdraft fee, one, argument with their significant other, one more time their son or daughter being called into the principal's office, and they snap. They just, their brain, their system just cannot handle one more crisis, a death in the family. And make no mistake, and this is one of my favorite points from Jordan Peterson, is if you're currently not suffering from a psychiatric event, you or someone close to you will, you know, if you're currently not suffering one. And that's so true. And so it's like, we know these things happen, we know they're going to happen. I feel like one of the best things we can do is have a diet that supports the brain, that supports our neurons, so that when that bad day happens, when you deal with the death of a loved one, when you deal with, a difficult situation, that loss of a job, which Tom, you experienced, during this pandemic, as many people have, you know, uh, now I remember you saying that when you weren't carnivore, you feel like there were days where maybe you wouldn't have been able to get out of bed, or your anxiety would have been so bad, right, Tom? If I remember right.
Yeah, well, it wasn't so much I wouldn't get out of bed, but that anxiety was always heavily influencing all my decisions. So, I was so worried about things, and so like uh, so distant from clearly being able to make better decisions because of those feelings of just like impending doom, like something bad's about to happen, everything's going to go wrong, and you're going to relive all the horrors of the past today. That like you realize that you're just not. It's taken over and made you into someone else, and your quality of life is much lower than it ought to be, right?
Yeah, and I've seen many carnivores excel during this pandemic, during this time. Either get a job, get a new job, move, um, get a house, do an addition, or something, where a lot of people are kind of paralyzed, by anxiety and fear, or this and that. And so, um, and with that comes confidence, and when you got money in the bank, steak in your belly, friends to talk to, communicate with. It just doesn't make any sense. It's just not worth it to go, shoot up the post office or go, do a break-in or
Food security is a big thing, right? Like when you're going to get fed. And I just want to throw in that, you know, if you leave it up to people like Bill Gates to decide, he's going to plant peas and synthesize fake meat from pea protein and feed that to you because he's buying up farmland left and right. I think he's now the largest owner of farmland in the United States, and that's the goal, is to make fake meat out of plant crops. Some people want to use bioreactors to have bacteria make fake meat. And it seemed like there was one other option for fake meat.
oh,
But
like from fecal matter. That's another one.
there you go.
Bugs, I think, is another one. Yeah.
Yeah, now that they've figured out how to detoxify cotton, that's gonna be part of the food supply. In the end, we could just have animals do it. So there's a lot of pasture land that's not fit for growing crops that cows and pigs and chickens and turkeys and guinea fowl and everything just do fine on, rabbits and so on and so forth, ducks and geese, that you can't plant crops on. And that's what was there before. You know, we used to have millions and millions of head of bison that just roamed the United States, and they didn't destroy the environment. They were basically this gigantic food source, and they walked around and they did their thing and everything was copacetic. And before that, it was woolly mammoths, mastodons, three-toed sloths, and all the other megafauna that really got wiped out by more than likely a impact, a meteor impact. They hit the Greenland ice sheet. So, and then it took out a lot of the really large animals that we evolved to eat, and then the smaller animals were left. So from an environmental standpoint, it's much greener to put these animals back on the land than it is to row crop a bunch of peas for protein, right? And then try, because look, anybody who's plant-based for a long time has to supplement with artificial vitamins of all kinds, right? Well, a lot of them lose their hair, they lose their teeth, their bones are fragile. I mean, it's almost comedy how many of these plant-based doctors break bones and have these horrific, catastrophic. Yeah, a lot of celebrities too. You can look in the news. I don't have to pick on them because lots of people have already done it. But they step out of the shower or the elevator and bam, their foot breaks. Why? Not because they're 55, 60 years old, but because they've been eating a plant-based diet. They're injecting vitamins because they can't just supplement enough. And most of those supplements that you take, you don't absorb most of it. And when you're eating a bunch of plant-based stuff, you're consuming a lot of phytic acid, and a lot of those nutrients just aren't being absorbed because they're bound up in phytic acid, they're bound up in fiber, and they're just going out in the toilet. And that's why being plant-based is a big waste, right? They create a lot more sewage, they create a lot more garbage, they create a lot more wasted food that goes in the trash. And being carnivore is far more advantageous for the planet because it's a natural state.
I totally agree, Tom. So I just want to say, just, whoever's watching this, chances are, now I don't know you, I don't know your particular situation or your brain chemistry or what you got going on, but just, from observation, from reading, from researching, from being in the carnivore community, as well as, trained as a mental health professional, um, chances are the solutions to your problems aren't in a pill, aren't at the bottom of a bottle, and aren't taking, a weapon into your hands. Chances are maybe not the solution, but the ability to handle the issue, to actually use those techniques that your psychologist is passing down to you to use when you're stressed or angry or sad or suicidal. Um, Maybe your answer is just simply at the grocery store, picking up a steak. Yeah, I know prices vary, but just, trying to eat a steak that day or a couple of steaks that day and see how you feel. That can possibly do a lot for you, you know.
I just want to mention too that I believe there is a new suicide. Yeah, so the FCC has adopted 988 as a three-digit number to be used nationwide to reach the National Suicide Prevention and Mental Health Crisis Line. So there you go. If you're having problems, you can just dial 988 and somebody can help you.
Exactly. And, you know, if you've picked up those two steaks a few times for a week or two and you're still struggling, hit up one of us. You know, we're in contact with many different coaches. Me and Tom both coach. And we'll work with you. We really, really will. We care about you. We care about your health journey. And, you know, if because we benefit, all right, we are selfish because if you're calm, um, then if we happen if we happen to run into you or run into someone that knows you, you know, and you pass that on. If you're calm and relaxed and focused and doing well, it spirals up, you know, not just in your own life, but it affects those around you, you know, and we can really make real change in this world, you know, and really, I don't want to sell it as utopian, but I believe we can do better than where we are currently.
I couldn't agree more. Yep. And we care about people. We're not just here trying to get people to eat meat. We just know that it had such a positive impact on our lives, helped us finally achieve things and have a better quality of life that we couldn't get any other way. We didn't hear it from our doctors. We didn't hear it from our parents. We didn't hear it at school. We didn't hear it from our friends. And that's why we like to spread the message to get it out there and let people know that, hey, look, hey, try just eating meat for one meal. And if you really think that eating animals is a form of violence, well, I beg to differ that, you know, it is just biologic reality and that they can be dispatched humanely. And if people are better nourished, their brains are healthier, there will be a lot less violence in the world. You know, we need to be grateful for every day that we live without violence, you
Mhm.
know. So we need to be grateful for every day we live without tragedy. And I think we can move towards that uh, together as everybody in the world if we understand that we evolved to eat meat. We chase down fatty animals. We are essentially lipivores with a protein requirement, right? And a healthy brain is fueled with fat.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for bringing up this topic, Justin. I think we made a great video here. I sincerely hope it helps people out there. And please consider sending a link to the video to somebody who might appreciate it or benefit from it. And leave us your comments. Don't forget to subscribe. The subscriptions are gradually growing or slowly growing,
Yeah.
which we all appreciate. Appreciate your comments. People often leave some very kind comments, and we appreciate hearing from
Oh
you.
yeah.
So definitely reach out, be part of the community, eat some meat, feel better, and whatever you do,
Don't
don't
fall
fall
down the
down.
carb hole.